Hi, I'm Jessie, a 25-year-old ceramic artist and small business owner. Welcome to Third Day Clay, my small business. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to make ceramic dominoes. Okay, let's get right into it. I hope you enjoy. Some of the materials you will need to make your very own domino set are cardboard for a template, a needle tool, a knife tool, a water and sponge, a flat scraping tool, ball tools with different sizes, a fettling knife, a respirator mask, underglaze, small paintbrushes, fine grit diamond sandpaper, clear glaze, and of course some clay. I'm using stoneware from Laguna Clay Company here. First, I started by cutting out a cardboard template. Here are the dimensions that I worked with. I ended up trimming the length down some along the way because the height of my template was a little bit taller than it should have been. Use whatever dimensions you think are best. I measured a domino from a set I had and used a clay shrinkage calculator online to figure out the dimensions that I need for 12% clay shrinkage. I then used that cardboard cutout to trace the dominoes on a little over 1/4 of an inch thick slab of clay. Make sure the slab of clay isn't too thin in some spots, because a handful of my dominoes weren't able to stand on their sides easily because some of them were a little bit too thin. So just look out for that. Here I'm making a double 12 domino set, so I cut out more than 91 dominoes just to be sure I had some extras in case some got messed up throughout the process. If you want to do a smaller or even larger set of dominoes, a quick Google search will let you know how many domino bases you will need to cut out. Be sure to keep your knife tool straight up and not at an angle so you get a nice flat cut and so there's less to touch up later. Next, I cleaned up any uneven lines and trimmed it down a bit with a knife tool to make it the shape that I want, since I made my template a little bit too tall. I then smoothed it out with some water and a sponge, lightly tapped each side on the table a couple times to get it flat, and set them aside to harden up slightly. I didn't film this part, but I used this keychain to indent the middle line of my dominoes. I later found out that this flat carving tool right here was much easier to use to create that middle line. You don't have to do a straight line for this part. You can maybe make a swirly or wavy pattern in the middle if you want to add a little bit more of a fun flair or style to it. Next, I cleaned up any harsh lines or parts that stuck out a bit and started to add the dots. I used some small ball tools that I got from my local craft store and they worked great. I used 3 different sizes, a big ball tool for numbers 1 through 5, a medium-sized tool for 6 through 9, and a small tool for 10 through 12. I had a reference photo in front of me as I was adding the numbers on the dominoes to make sure I didn't miss any of them. I found a reference photo by searching up double 12 domino set and finding an image that had them all laid out. I then set the dominoes aside to dry completely before refining the pieces. Once they were completely bone dry, I took a fettling knife and scraped the raised parts so the dots were flush with the surface. Because this step creates a lot of clay dust, be sure to wear a respirator for this part. We want to keep that silica dust out of our lungs. This part was so satisfying to me, refining the shape and making the edges a little bit more crisp. I feel like little touch-up steps like this really elevate pieces and make them feel a bit more official in some ways. Now it is time to pick out the colors. This was a fun step, let me tell you. You can choose whatever color scheme you like here. I would suggest to space out the warm and the cool colors as best as you can. I used the pink for the 10s and the orange for the 11s, and they looked a little bit too similar next to each other, which gets confusing at times. So if I made these again, I would probably use the orange for a smaller number and keep the 10s pink, so it makes them easier to identify. I also made a little legend that had the numbers and the colors I assigned to them written out and displayed in front of me. This allowed for a more mindless, automatic, and efficient painting process. For painting, I used an assortment of small brushes to glob on some underglaze inside the dots. You can do this underglaze step before or after the bisque fire. I decided to paint before the bisque firing just because if any of the paint somehow flakes off or chips off during the firing, because you truly never know what will happen in the kiln, then I would have another chance to fix any of the messed up dots. Luckily, I didn't have to deal with doing any of that. Later, you'll see me painting a design on the backs of the dominoes. You can do that step before the bisque fire here as well, but I decided to wait. I've seen that sometimes the underglaze from the pieces can transfer onto the things that you stack them on top of when firing them in the kiln. So since I was going to be stacking these on top of each other, I wanted to just play it safe and paint the backs later so nothing transfers and messes up any of my dominoes. Next, I cleaned up the painted dots with water and a sponge. If you do put the underglaze on at this greenware stage, be careful when cleaning up the dominoes with a sponge. Some of the colors got a little cloudy from wiping some of the clay into the colored dots. You can either use a sponge like I did, or go back in with a fettling knife to scrape off any undesired paint spots. If I made a domino set again, I think I would probably go down the fettling knife route for this step. Once you're sure the dominoes are completely dry, it is time to fire them. I stacked them on top of each other in my mini kiln and fired them to cone 04. And because this is the first fire, called the Bisque fire, I can stack my pieces on top of each other and not have to worry about them fusing to one another because of any glaze or anything like that. After the Bisque fire, I decided to wet sand the backs of them down with some fine grit sandpaper, so there's less sanding to do at the end. You might be able to get away with not sanding them at this point, but I just wanted to make sure the backs were super smooth since I wouldn't be glazing this part of the dominoes. The sandpaper I'm using here is from Diamond Core Tools. It's the 2.5 by 4 inch 400 grit diamond sandpaper. I got it during their BOGO sale in July, and it is perfect for this job. Because I wanted to add a little bit more character to these dominoes, I decided to paint a simple design on the backs with some blue underglaze. While each domino back is technically unique just from the nature of them being hand painted, I still think it's safe to say that it would be pretty hard to identify the numbers from the backs because there are only very slight differences. I thought that this would be a daunting task painting all the backs of the dominoes, but it surprisingly went faster than I thought it would. I picked a simple design and stuck with it. I think because it was more of a simple design, that's what made it feel like it went really quick. Next, it is time to glaze. I chose to dip the dominoes instead of brushing them because I figured it would be quicker. Because I didn't want to deal with glazing all parts of the dominoes and putting them on stilts, I decided to leave the backs of the dominoes unglazed so I can set them down on the kiln shelves and not have to worry about them sticking during the fire. I used my hands to dip the front and sides into the glaze and then cleaned up the bare spots where I held the dominoes with a brush. For some of the numbers, I had to go in with a paintbrush to make sure everything was covered with glaze. Sometimes the glaze doesn't fully cover indents when you dip them. It may be better to leave the sides unglazed here, or just make sure all of your dominoes are thick enough to where they can stand on their sides with no problems. Some of the dominoes I made weren't able to stand up on their own because the sides were too thin. You can maybe try scraping away some of the glaze on the sides so the application is a bit thinner and it makes it less bulky after glaze fire, but I found that making the dominoes thicker in depth during the greenware part fixed the problem. You can also just buy domino trays that help prop the dominoes up if there are any that don't stand very well. After the glaze fully dries, it is time to fire them again. I spread them out on the kiln shelf, making sure that none of them were touching. Because I had a design on the back, I found that when I dragged them across the kiln shelf, some of the blue from the design rubbed off and transferred onto the shelves. So when you need to move any, be sure to pick them up to move them instead of dragging them. I programmed the kiln to fire at cone 6 at medium speed with no preheat or no hold. You could probably program it to do a fast fire since they are small pieces and completely dry. I usually just like to play it safe and do a medium fire. Once the kiln is cooled, it is time to take them out. This is my favorite part, seeing all the fun, colorful dominoes together. The sound they make when they clink together is also just so satisfying to me. The very last step before your new domino set is complete is to sand the backs down just a little bit more so they are super buttery smooth. I used the same 400 grit diamond sandpaper from before and lightly wet sanded the backs again. Be sure to use a light hand when sanding because you don't want to accidentally sand off the design on the backs. Because there's a fairly thick application of underglaze on the backs, going over it lightly with sandpaper won't really affect the designs too much. You may still feel the texture from the painted design, but the ceramic part will be very smooth. And there you have it, your very own handmade ceramic domino set. There seriously is something so cool about playing with dominoes that are made by hand. I hope that you all thought this tutorial video was helpful and entertaining as well. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.